Angel Reese is a poison and a toxin that has been added to that locker room. When you're that big in a league that struggles to get attention, and Angel Reese gets a lot of attention, I find it odd that the Chicago Sky would jettison her after just 2 years. I think that speaks to what a headache she was in Chicago. Teammates didn't want to play with her. Coaches couldn't corral her. She was out there doing her double-double routine while the Chicago Sky were actually trying to win games or run an offense, and Angel Reese was just out there chasing stats.
The Chicago Sky trading Angel Reese for such a small return changed the whole way people look at her value, her future, and her place in this league. That is the main point. This was not the kind of move that makes fans say, okay, both sides got something strong back. This was the kind of move that made people stop and ask what really happened behind the scenes. When a young player with star name value, big numbers, and major attention gets moved for what feels like bargain bin assets, the first question is always the same. Why did the team want out so badly? And once that question starts, the whole story gets louder. That is exactly why so many people are talking now. On the surface, Angel Reese still has things teams want. She rebounds at a high level, she brings energy. She brings attention, she brings emotion, she brings a fan base. And in today's sports world, attention matters. Jersey sales matter. Headlines matter. Social media numbers matter. But when a team still decides to move on that fast, people start to think the numbers and the spotlight were not enough to cover the bigger problems. That is where this story gets serious, because this is no longer just about talent, it is about fit, value, trust, and what a team truly believes it can win with. The part that hit hardest was the return. Fans looked at the deal and instantly started calling it cheap. They looked at what Chicago got back and said that does not feel like full value for a young player who already made all-star teams and led the league in rebounding. That reaction was natural. Most people expected a stronger package. They expected a team trading a player with that level of name value to get real pieces, not something that felt like future leftovers. And when that did not happen, the trade stopped looking like a basketball reset and started looking like a clear message. The message was simple. Chicago wanted to move on more than it wanted to squeeze every last bit of value out of the deal. That is what makes this so damaging to Angel Reese's image. If a team truly believes in a player as a long-term piece, it usually protects that player's value. It shops the market, waits for stronger offers, and acts like it has leverage. But this deal did not feel like that. It felt like Chicago had already reached a point where solving the problem mattered more than winning the train on paper. And whether that problem was style, fit, tension, attitude, or just a bad match with the direction of the team, the public reaction was immediate. People saw the low return and made up their minds fast. They said, if Chicago only got this much, then maybe the league is not as high on Angel Reese as her fans think. That is why this trade feels bigger than one move. It exposed the gap between attention and value. Angel Reese is absolutely one of the most talked about names in women's basketball. She drives clicks, debate, and strong opinions. But being talked about and being viewed as a clean, winning piece are not always the same thing. A player can be famous and still raise major questions inside a front office. A player can trend online and still make coaches feel uneasy about long-term fit. And that is what this trade seems to have revealed. Chicago.
No, no, and no. And so I know you're getting me out of the way because I probably watched the least amount of WNBA among this whole four panel. But this would be my advice to those young ladies that you mentioned, right, on that new Atlanta team of hers. Get ready to stick your hands out like this and never get the ball. Because she's going to get the rebound, get another rebound, get another rebound, another rebound, and another me-bound. And there's going to be, I'm fascinated by this in this sense. And Scap, I'm going to watch some highlight clips of Atlanta starting this season.
Caitlin Clark is seen by many as a player who lifts spacing, pace, passing, and team offense in a very clear way. Reese, on the other hand, still has critics asking whether her numbers lead to smooth winning basketball at the pro level. Fair or unfair, that is the comparison sitting in people's minds, and this trade made it even harsher. The reason is simple. Front offices pay for fit. Coaches trust fit. Winning teams need fit. Caitlin Clark's game makes sense right away in the modern style people want. She stretches the floor. She creates shots for others. She changes how defenses line up before the play even starts. With Reese, the questions are different. Can she space the floor enough? Can she fit next to other bigs? Can guards operate cleanly around her? Can the offense breathe with her in it? Can the locker room stay calm when the pressure rises? Those are harder questions, and once a team trades you for a small return, those questions only get louder. Now, to be fair, Angel Reese still does things at a high level. You do not lead the league in rebounding by accident. You do not pull in that many loose balls, second chances, and tough boards without real effort and real skill. That part of her game is real. Her motor is real. Her desire to fight in the paint is real. She has a nose for the ball. She has hunger around the rim. She keeps plays alive. And in a lot of games, that matters. But the problem is that front offices do not only judge what you do well, they judge what you force the rest of the team to work around. They judge how cleanly your strengths fit with the team's style. And if the fit is messy, then the shine comes off fast. That seems to be what happened in Chicago. The Sky did not trade Angel Reese because she forgot how to rebound. They traded her because the full picture no longer looked worth the trouble. That is the part fans need to understand. Teams do not move young players with star name value that quickly unless something deeper is off. Maybe it was locker room tension. Maybe it was style. Maybe it was the public comments. Maybe it was frustration on both sides. Maybe it was all of it together. But whatever the exact mix was, Chicago clearly came to a hard conclusion. They decided the future looked cleaner without her than with her. And that is the coldest part of this whole story. The trade was not just about what Angel Reese is. It was also about who Chicago chose instead. When a team moves off one young player, it is often because it sees a better path in another one. That makes this feel like more than a normal basketball move. It feels like a vote on culture, a vote on style, a vote on who fits the long game better. And when a player loses that vote, it stings more than any single headline. Clark brings spacing, passing, and pressure on the defense every second she is on the floor. That does not mean Reese is bad. It means the basketball impact is viewed differently, and front offices see that difference very clearly. That is also why Atlanta is such an interesting landing spot. On the one hand, the Dream get a player with a strong brand, strong rebounding, and a chance to prove Chicago wrong. That is the positive reading. On the other hand, Atlanta may have just added a complicated fit to a front court that already had big questions. That is where people start getting nervous. Because if the spacing was already a concern, how does it get better with another player who does not stretch the floor much? If the team already had questions about speed and movement in the front court, how does adding Reese solve that? Those are real questions, and if they are not answered early, this whole thing could get messy very fast. That matters even more when you bring Indiana into the picture, because the moment Angel Reese moved to Atlanta, fans immediately jumped to the matchup with Caitlin Clark and the Fever. That is the rivalry people want. That is the headline people want. But from a pure basketball point of view, it is not a simple matchup for Atlanta at all. Indiana wants pace, movement, spacing, and quick decisions. If Atlanta tries to match that with a heavy front court and weak floor spacing, it could get ugly. Reese may grab rebounds, but rebounds alone do not solve the bigger problem if the other team is dragging your defense into hard choices on every trip. And this is where the "she's no Caitlin Clark" talk gets its force. It is not only about fame, it is about what type of player changes the shape of a game more easily. Clark changes the shape of a game with shooting range, ball movement, and constant pressure. Defenses have to bend toward her. That opens everything. Reese changes the game in a different way, mostly with effort, rebounding, and energy around the basket. The problem is that at the highest level, teams often find it easier to work around a non-shooting big than around a guard who warps the floor the second she crosses half court. That is the ugly basketball truth sitting underneath all the noise. None of this means Angel Reese cannot succeed in Atlanta. She can. She can rebound, defend inside, bring edge, and find a cleaner role if the coaching staff uses her the right way. In some ways, a simpler role might actually help her, less pressure to be something she is not, more focus on what she already does well, more time crashing the glass, running the floor, defending, and playing off stronger scores. If that happens, then maybe Atlanta gets the best version of her. Maybe the trade looks smart from their side. Maybe Chicago ends up regretting it. That is still possible. But the reason this trade exploded the way it did is because right now, the public sees the opposite. The public sees a team giving up on her early. The public sees a light return. The public sees all the talk about fit and tension. The public sees the contrast between her image and her market value. And once those things line up, the story writes itself. That is why so many fans used words like cheap, bargain, or pennies on the dollar. They were not just reacting to picks, they were reacting to what those picks seemed to say about how teams really view Angel Reese behind closed doors. That is what makes this such a brutal moment for her brand. Brands are built on story, and this story is hard to spin. If she had demanded out and forced the team's hand, that would be one thing. If Chicago had landed a major return, that would be one thing. But this move looked like Chicago quietly deciding that peace, balance, and fit mattered more than keeping one of its biggest names. That is a rough message for any player to wear, especially one who sees herself as a face of the sport. It also feeds the larger criticism that her supporters and her critics have been arguing about for a long time. Her supporters say she is disrespected, underpraised, and judged too harshly. Her critics say her game gets overrated because of the spotlight around her. This trade just threw fuel on both sides. Supporters say Chicago sold low and handled her badly. Critics say the trade proved the league is not fooled by big rebounding numbers if the full...
Not what people say, not what fans argue about online, not what the trade return looked like the day it happened. What matters is whether she can turn this into a real answer on the court. Can she fit in Atlanta without bringing drama? Can she accept a role that helps the team instead of trying to prove too much every night? Can she improve enough offensively that teams stop ignoring her away from the rim? Can she become the kind of player a winning team trusts in big moments? Those are the questions now, because if she cannot, then the worst version of this story will stick. People will say Chicago saw the truth before everyone else. People will say the trade return was low for a reason. People will say the fame was bigger than the value. And once that idea takes hold, it is hard to shake. A player can fight media takes, a player can fight rival fans, but it is much harder to fight the quiet judgment of front offices, because front offices speak through actions, and Chicago's action was loud. At the same time, if she does succeed in Atlanta, this could become the fuel that reshapes her whole career. Great players often need one moment that makes everything personal, one moment where the league, a team, or the public sends a message they never forget. This could be that moment for Angel Reese. Being moved for a small return, hearing people laugh at the value, hearing the Caitlin Clark comparison get harsher, hearing people say she is not worth the trouble. All of that can either break a player's focus or sharpen it, and we do not know yet which way this will go for her. What we do know is that right now the league has drawn a line between attention and trust. Angel Reese still has attention, no doubt about that. She will keep getting cameras, headlines, and debate, but trust is something else. Trust is what makes a team build around you. Trust is what makes a front office protect your value. Trust is what makes coaches feel safe when the game gets tight. This trade suggests Chicago lost that trust, and once that becomes the story, the burden shifts to Reese to prove it wrong. That is why this is not just another trade story. It is a reputation story. It is a fit story. It is a truth story. Chicago did not say Angel Reese cannot play. That would be too simple. What Chicago seemed to say is colder than that. They seem to say that whatever she brings, it is not worth what it costs us anymore. That is a much more painful message. It says the issue is not just talent. It says the issue is everything around the talent, too. And that is exactly why the Caitlin Clark comparison is going to follow this move all season. Clark is seen as a player teams dream about building with. Reese is now trying to fight off the idea that she is a player teams eventually get tired of building around. That may not be fair, that may not be fully true, but that is how the story looks right now, and stories shape everything in sports. Until Reese changes the story on the floor, this trade will keep being used as proof against her. So yes, Angel Reese may be furious, she may feel insulted, she may feel betrayed, she may believe she is worth far more than what Chicago got back. But the hard truth is that the trade itself exposed how the league, or at least parts of it, may view her right now. Not as a franchise changer, not as an untouchable young star,
not as the kind of player a team refuses to move. And that is why this whole situation hit so hard, because for all the confidence, all the talk, and all the attention, the market spoke in a much colder voice. Now the next chapter starts in Atlanta, and that chapter will decide a lot. If Reese fits, grows, and helps the dream win, then she can turn this whole thing into a revenge story. If the same problems follow her, then Chicago's decision will only look smarter with time. That is why the pressure on her now is huge, not because of the headlines alone, but because this is the moment where she has to prove she is more than rebounding numbers, more than emotion, and more than a loud public image. In the end, the biggest reason this story exploded is because the trade made one thing clear. Angel Reese is still a major name,